Good morning, early afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are just going to give it a few minutes before we get started. So hang tight. And if as you're waiting, you want to just put in the chat where you're calling in from, any organizational affiliation you have, that would be wonderful. It's always great to know where folks are calling in from. Wonderful. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I think we're going to wait just a few more minutes, or actually, we can go ahead and get going because I know we have a packed agenda. And as folks join in, they will be able to kind of tune into the conversation. But I want to start by just saying welcome to today's event focused on innovative approaches to building mapping. My name is Logan Malik, and I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. And we are so honored and excited to be partnering with the Massachusetts Building Electrification Accelerator on this event. It's a critical event and a critical issue, really, that we have to be discussing as we think about equitable building decarbonization. And so excited to be joined by our wonderful group of panelists. I think you all are in for a real treat. Next slide, please, Miranda. So just a few housekeeping items before we go ahead and get started. First and foremost, you should have gotten the notification, but just in case you didn't, we are recording this webinar. So it shouldn't come up, but if you are, if you're worried about the recording, I would just encourage you to keep your video off to make sure that you are not in the recording. If you have any questions, please be sure to put them in the chat. We have a packed agenda, but we're gonna try to get to them. So make sure to put them in the chat so we can find them and have our panelists address them at the end. The final thing I want to just mention is that we're going to be sending out all of the resources that we talk about today in a follow-up email to the folks that RSVP'd to this event, including a recording of the event. So if you're looking for a link in particular, we'll try to get that to you while we're in real time. But if you're worried that you're not going to get it, don't fear. We are going to send it. We are going to send it in a follow-up email. So I think that's everything for me. I just want to say thank you all so much for being here again. And I will pass it over to our partner organization and colleague, Cora. Take it away.
Hi. So thank you all so much for being here, and to the MCAN team for working with us, and to our wonderful speakers for joining us today. My name is Cora Weisbord. I'm one of the facilitators of the Massachusetts Building Electrification Accelerator, along with Ann Wright. So we have a lot to learn in an hour, as Logan mentioned. First, we're going to hear from Gregory King with TSK Energy Solutions on a new planning framework for environmental justice investments and mapping work in Boston's Grove Hall neighborhood. Next, Erin Camp with PowerOptions is going to share the Building Decarbonization Roadmap with us. The roadmap is a high-level guidance report that recommends how to decarbonize a building or portfolio over time. Craig Altemose with BlocPower will demonstrate block maps. Block maps is a software toolkit with building data visualization and impact estimates to identify locations and plans for instituting energy efficiency measures. And finally, Lucy Lyons, a co-founder of UK startup Kestrix, will share Kestrix building energy surveying model before we move into our Q&A. Next slide, please. So to get us started today, we're going to hear from Gregory King. Gregory King is an entrepreneur and innovator with over 25 years of experience in strategic planning, business development, and executive management of technology-focused businesses. He is currently the managing director of TSK Energy Solutions. a minority business enterprise focused on delivering energy innovations to commercial buildings. Mr. King is a clean energy workforce development consultant with deep expertise in renewable energy and building energy efficiency. He designs world-class workforce development programs that connect employers, job seekers, technical training organizations, and community-based organizations. Mr. King is a director at Roxbury Community College, where he was instrumental in the creation of the Center for Smart Building Technology, whose mission is to prepare the skilled workforce needed to achieve the City of Boston's carbon neutral by 2050 goals. Mr. King is a board member for the New England Clean Energy Council, PowerOptions, and the BEA, and he serves on the advisory committee of the Northeastern School of Public Policy and Urban Affairs. Gregory, thank you for joining us and for getting us started today, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Cora, and thank you, Logan, and thanks for organizing this great event. Next slide. So I'm here to talk about some new work I am involved in. This is an effort to create a framework for environmental justice communities who seek to compete for either social impact investments or the $110 billion of EPA funding coming from the IRA. And we're developing this framework around the concept developed by the executive director of the Greater Grove Hall Main Street. It's called the Green Zone. And so the executive director in Grove Hall had a vision of creating a new zoning framework for communities like himself to be able to address decades of environmental justice. So the use of term green zone represents a justice-oriented approach to new investments, planning decisions, infrastructure development, and community participation. And the green zone planning framework is where I've been collaborating on. Is intended to be a process as a pathway to green building practices, a healthier environmental and stronger economic future for EJ communities. So while we're doing this in Grove Hall, the goal of the framework is actually to be a general tool for any community seeking to address, decades of environmental justice. Next slide. So this is the framework pictorially. So the framework begins with environmental audit. In Grove Hall, we're in the process of setting up a real-time indoor and outdoor air quality monitoring network. We've done some analysis around health outcomes, where this community has the highest asthma rates, in the city of Boston, and of course, looking at land use. That then leads to what we refer to as a community landscape analysis. This is really an intent to try to categorize all the infrastructure that exists in a community, whether it be a building, a hardscape like a parking lot, or transportation corridor, or electrical or distribution networks. And that feeds into a new financial and social impact analysis. Think of it as a mini feasibility study for different types of project, whether it be decarbonizing buildings, implementing green roofs, or doing work to mitigate heat island effect. And part of that work, we're developing new social impact calculators based on something called the impact rate of return. So projects will be not only evaluated for their cost and financial feasibility, but on the impact. And in our case, we're looking at greenhouse gas reductions. And then ultimately, this all feeds into a community master plan. And with the types of challenges facing many communities, we're not going to solve the problems of these communities without a comprehensive, community-wide, because there's so many interconnected challenges that we want to try to address holistically. Next slide. And so, for those of you who aren't familiar with environmental justice, it's really about the fair and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental health hazards, and equal access to the decision-making process. I happen to be a person who grew up next to a steel mill and was an asthmatic. So I lived in an early environmental justice community in Pennsylvania. Next slide. And so the environmental justice movement is really pretty much an Afro-American movement. It really came out of the 80s, where there was a case in North Carolina where they wanted to put a solid waste landfill adjacent a community, and that community went to the streets in an effort to build awareness of the environmental harm that was being placed in their neighborhood by providing these toxic waste sites in their community. Next slide. And so, since then, since the 80s, been the status quo. I mean, so I can't say we made a lot of progress. And this data is from the ACEE, really trying to pin down the major things that have sort of supported the status quo. One of which is, of course, the history of being excluded from clean energy initiatives, high energy burdens, and underrepresentation in the workforce. So these are all persistent problems that we've been unable to solve until recently. Next slide. So the green zone, or the Grove Hall Green Zone feasibility study is being funded by a Mass CEC and Power grant. So shout out to Mass CEC for all the good work they're doing to help advance environmental justice. It's really about being able to foster green design interventions, including potential use of green roofs or other technologies. And of course, zonings and zones have been used to achieve different goals. And so there's currently legislation that's been filed to create a statewide green zone framework. And of course, the desire of the community is really to become self-sufficient. And so part of the planning process we're developing is to support their aspirations. Next slide. And so, Greater Grove Hall is probably the poster child for environmental justice. It's 3% of the land mass of Massachusetts, of city of Boston, and it's 38% of the brownfields. It's got the highest asthma rates. It's probably the lowest income. It has high crime and other challenges. And so it's been really exposed to a disproportionate environmental hazards. So it's a socially vulnerable community as a result. Next slide. So our objectives with the Green Zone planning framework is really around enabling community-led development, increasing awareness of the environment. So we're using data visualization and geospatial data to essentially help educate community members about hazards that exist. We're looking to use innovation and investments. So we're looking at trying to change the dialogue from the typical project internal rate of return to the impact rate of return, and identify projects for investments by ranking them in terms of their impact, in terms of decreasing greenhouse gas reductions. And of course, our goal is to help increase community resiliency from climate change and ultimately to improve public health. Next slide. And so the in Grove Hall, and by the way, the link to the actual landscape analysis, which is quite comprehensive, will be available in the materials. But in the Grove Hall area, there is a significant number of residential. 86% of the community is residential, and 21 are commercial, and then we have about 87 that are non-commercial. Next slide. Of that, there's only 5% of the buildings there that could be considered traditional single family. Most of the residential buildings there are either 2-family or 3-family, which is a significant amount. And the average age of those buildings is about 106 years. And so decarbonizing those buildings will be quite challenging. And again, we're doing this analysis in an effort to try to tease out where the high impact project. So in this case, obviously decarbonizing 2- or 3-family homes should be a priority given the high percentage of that particular building stock in this community. Next slide. And then of course, we do have some non-residential parcels there, which are largely exempt buildings. There's quite a few vacant property there. So City of Boston has, and then of course we have churches and schools and other institutions. Next slide. And of course, impervious surfaces. So we have little or no green canopy. There's a lot of concrete here. It's a heat island. And as a result, there are a lot of health side effects for the heat island impact. And so, one of the things we are looking at is new technologies that would allow us to apply surface coatings that would reflect heat, and of course, use of other like green and white roofs and other types of intervention. Next. Okay, and I think that's pretty much what I have to say for this morning. The actual landscape analysis in detail, which has gas leaks, distribution networks, buildings, hardscapes, transportation corridors, is all available through that the link that will be shared. And the legislation that's been filed is in both the House and the State Senate. And we continue to keep our fingers crossed that there'll be more resources and more funding for communities like Grove Hall to address harm that's been inflicted on their communities. Thank you for today.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing the Green Zone framework and the feasibility project with us. Really appreciate it. So up next, we're going to hear from Erin Camp at PowerOptions on the Building Decarbonization Roadmap. Erin is the Energy Sustainability Analytics Program Manager at PowerOptions, and she's leading the design and execution of PowerOptions' new program that provides sustainability advisory and data analytics services to PowerOptions members. Erin has a decade of professional experience as an energy consultant, researcher, and analyst working in the sustainable energy transition space. Her areas of expertise include electrification of buildings and transportation, and energy economics and policy. Prior to joining PowerOptions, she worked as a senior consultant at Synapse Energy Economics, where she served as a project manager and energy analyst for nonprofit and government clients. Before Synapse, Erin worked at the Cadmus Group for public sector clients on strategic electrification and energy policies and programs. Erin earned a PhD in geological sciences from Cornell University and a Bachelor of Arts in Geology from Amherst College in Massachusetts. Erin, thank you so much for being here. We're looking forward to learning about the Building Decarbonization Roadmap.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for having me. It's a delight to be here. So I guess we can just flip to the first slide or the next. Yeah, perfect. So PowerOptions is a nonprofit energy consortium serving nearly 500 nonprofits and public entities across Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Our mission is to reduce the cost, carbon, and complexity of energy so that our members can focus on their own important missions. For 25 years, we've been a trusted energy advisor, primarily specializing in competitive procurements that our members can take advantage of due to an enabling statute and mass general law. We started with electricity and gas supply, and in the last decade, we've added a variety of sustainability-focused programs, notably solar and storage, EV charging stations, energy efficiency, and sustainability planning. Next slide, please. Perfect. So this is a high-level overview of the program that I manage, and underneath this program are 4 different pillars, and the Building Decarbonization Roadmap work falls under this program. Other components of this program include fleet electrification, road mapping, data analytics, and energy advisory. And so next slide, please. Oh, why can't I see the slides anymore? There we go. All right. Perfect. Thank you. So the Building Decarbonization Roadmap is a high-level guidance report that recommends how to decarbonize a building or a portfolio over time. And it's intended to work for both a portfolio or a building. It doesn't really matter how many buildings you have in it. The end product is about a 10-page report that starts with a 1-page executive summary. It's brief, but has all the complete information that you need to understand what to do in what year and what it's going to cost. And then finally, there's a detailed appendix at the end of the report. The decarbonization analysis includes 4 key pieces. First, we do a virtual energy efficiency audit, and we use Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory's Better tool to do that using a year of historical energy bills. The second thing we do is a virtual solar assessment using Helioscope to figure out if there's options for on-site solar. And if not, we look at options for off-site solar through a remote offtake mechanism. Third, we look at electrifying the building, including all fossil fuel end uses, HVAC, cooking, water heating, anything that is using fossil fuels on site to convert to high efficiency electric heat pumps. Both looking at air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps for larger buildings where the economics make sense. And then finally, as a last option, and only as a worst case scenario option, we use RECs to fill in the gap of covering the emissions associated with electricity usage if the grid does not become 100% emissions free by 2050. So the key outputs of the roadmap include the capital costs, savings, any incentives, financing options, any BERDO penalties for if a building owner is located in Boston under the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, and the greenhouse gas reduction potential and trajectory for each building. The inputs we ask for are at the building level. So we don't ask for specific equipment information. Again, this is a high level report, so everything we ask for is an aggregate at the building level. And so we ask for the square footage of each building, the existing equipment types and ages, and as well as the roof age, and then 1 year of all the utility bills. And then right now we have funding through Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, another shout out to them, thank you. And they're helping us provide this product to our members at an extreme discount. So right now we're charging $500 per building to provide this to nonprofits and public entities. So next slide, please. So I wanted to show a few snapshots of what the roadmap includes. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do a full demonstration of the tool, but if you are interested, feel free to reach out to me. I provided my contact information at the end of these slides, and I'd be happy to walk you through a demonstration of the roadmap. But again, the roadmap is a report that's about 10 pages long, and each of those 4 components has its own page dedicated to energy efficiency, solar, electrification, RECs as needed. And then let's go to the next page to show, yeah, thank you. So, and on the right side of this page is one of the other, right side of the slide is another page from the roadmap highlighting what the timeline looks like. So we don't want these roadmaps to just sit on the shelf after they're complete. So PowerOptions has existing programs that exist to help our members start to implement this. And I just want to note real quick that we are about halfway through a pilot with Mass CEC. Our goal is to do about 30 roadmaps a year, and we're doing a pilot of 8 roadmaps, and we're done with about 5 of them right now. And we're moving on through the rest of the pilot. And then jumping into the full program. But once a roadmap is complete, that is when PowerOptions starts to shift into implementation mode and helping our members connect into each of our programs for energy efficiency, solar, and then soon to be a heat pump procurement program with novel financing so that our members can afford to get heat pumps in their building without huge capital costs. I think that covers that. So that summarizes the Building Decarb Roadmap. And if anyone's interested, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to share it with you. Again, thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you. So Erin, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Next, we're going to hear from Craig Altemose on block maps. Craig is the Director of Strategic Partnerships at BlocPower, a Black-owned climate technology company. Prior to joining BlocPower, Craig served as the founding executive director of Better Future Project, a climate advocacy and organizing nonprofit based in Massachusetts. Craig holds a JD from Harvard Law School, an MPP from Harvard Kennedy School, and a BA from Eckerd College. He lives with his wife and 2 young sons in Maynard. Craig, thank you for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cora, and Logan, everyone from the Building Electrification Accelerator and Erin Camp for having me today. Next slide. Excited to talk to you all about our Block Maps program. As mentioned, BlocPower is a Black-owned climate technology company. focus on making buildings smarter at scale to reduce emissions while improving indoor air quality and creating new jobs. Thank you. BlocPower actually does a lot beyond software mapping. We're going to be focusing on our technology and data today, but just to give folks a brief overview, we also have raised hundreds of millions of dollars in inclusive financing to help finance building electrification projects. We also run programs for cities, utilities, and states around building electrification, including notably workforce development. And then we also do direct project management for building owners to help building owners electrify their buildings. Next slide, please. So here's a sampling of some of the programs that we have ongoing or have done with block maps. So we can really help communities at any stage of the process if they really are just trying to figure out what their building stock looks like so they can get a handle on how to execute programs. We can be there for that. If they want to start designing programs and want to know more about the building stock to do that, we can be there for that. And then finally, if they have programs they want to help execute and figure out how to prioritize the buildings within their existing building stock, again, we can help them with deploying those programs. Next slide, please. It goes beyond designing the programs. We can certainly help folks be able to deploy more of their resources through this planning tool on the building electrification. We can use the data in the system to help get external funding from the state or the federal government or from philanthropic partners. And we can help drive impact at a faster scale with our machine learning model. Just being able to get those projects rolling. So next slide. So I'm always a fan of when you can show, not tell. So I'm actually going to share the demo directly with folks. So this is a demo of the Cambridge instance that we stood up for the city of Cambridge here in Massachusetts. And if you see here, there's a map to the right. This is the full building stock of Cambridge, 12,834 buildings we have in our database. This is currently segmented by the building, the energy efficiency improvement potential that our machine learning calculated for each building. We also have upgrade measure predictions that you can look at, which basically is that if we did every upgrade to every building, our estimate is that it would cost $950 million and would cut Cambridge's building pollution in half. You can view this by a wide number of different variables here: heat pump feasibility, owner occupation, affordable housing, whether or not they have solar, again, the type of buildings, the heating fuel types, just to look at the breakdown of heating tool, mostly gas, some oil. You can look at the median family income, so a lot of upper income, some moderate, some middle, some unknown, some low. And unknown is oftentimes, for like commercial buildings, right? You don't really have income for a commercial building. But anyway, so then you can also not just view the building stock like this, but you can filter buildings to really figure out what buildings you want to target. So if we want to say, so showing across, again, you have the energy efficient improvement potential, heat pump feasibility. So you can look at the types of buildings: affordable housing, multifamily, different types of non-residential, single family, what year the buildings are built in, energy usage intensity, again, the heating fuel type. And then, if you want to be able to screen by equity considerations, there's environmental justice need, Massachusetts environmental justice definition, median family income again, and then some specific insights that Cambridge asked around low-income rate class indicators and who had participated previously in the Cambridge Energy Alliance programs. So just to model quickly how this can work for folks. So if you want to say, look at owner-occupied buildings that are smaller single family, so 2 to 3 family homes that are heated by oil, you're able to take that group of 12,000 buildings and narrow it down to 281 buildings that meet these characteristics. Of those, 84 of those buildings have a high energy efficiency improvement potential, 155 have moderate, 42 have low. And then you can actually zoom in further at the actual building level with these buildings and see a particular building. This is a demo, so we've hidden the actual address, but you can see all the data you have for that building. And then you can see, again, the projected upgrade measures for that building, along with the incentives that we think that they would be eligible for under both the federal legislation, Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the Mass Save rebates that are available out there. And you can save these buildings to a list. You can save all the buildings in a filter to a list, which allows you then to have a list of buildings that you can use for a mailing campaign, for an outreach campaign, you can give to a vendor, or that if you hire BlocPower, we can help you reach out to those building owners and encourage them to pursue these upgrade measures to really get the building stock electrified. So I think I'm probably close to my time here with that, but obviously it's a great tool. I think gives you a lot of insight into what a different community, what the opportunities are for electrification, what the costs are, to really allow for both effective planning and execution of projects. So if you want to go back to the slides real quick, just want to, next slide, please. So there's my email. I'll also put that in the chat, but if folks want to have a longer demo or talk about how we can bring block maps to your community, we'd love to have that chat. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Cora.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing block maps with us today. So our final speaker is Lucy Lyons. Lucy's experience is in founding and scaling climate tech startups between Germany and the UK, as well as research and innovation in climate policy. After a first experience as a founder, she was the first sales hire at Plan A, Europe's B2B carbon accounting software platform. She holds a Master of Science in Sustainability, Enterprise, and the Environment from the University of Oxford, and a BA in Global Studies with a focus on urban development from New York University. And she's a Sigma Squared Fellow. Lucy, I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Cora. I'll start off by just saying how excited I am to be here, as I'll tell you guys more about Kestrix is a UK startup, but I'm originally from Boston. This is the first time actually we're presenting Kestrix to a Massachusetts-based audience. So I'm Lucy, as Cora said, I'm the co-founder of Kestrix, and we are using mass thermal image capture and AI to scale building retrofit. Next, please. So is your house cold, or was it cold this winter? And as a follow-on, are your energy bills skyrocketing? Next. If the answer is yes, you are most likely not alone. Today, about 30% of energy that we use in buildings is literally wasted, leaking out the windows, the roofs, and the walls. With 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 already built, next please, this means that the world, not just the states, needs to retrofit our buildings for energy efficiency at speed and at scale. Next. Now, the problem is globally, we're not going fast enough. To reach net zero by 2050, we actually need to retrofit 90 million homes globally every single year. Next. Today, we're doing just 25% of that. Next. So why are we moving so slowly if so many of the technologies we need to decarbonize buildings, first of them literally insulation, exist and are ready to be deployed at scale? Next. As with many things, one of the problems is data. So take it from Kestrix's first customer, which is a top 5 UK social housing provider. For them, they're planning retrofits, but existing energy efficiency data of buildings, so in the UK, the Energy Performance Certificate system, just isn't accurate enough to plan or validate insulation projects at scale. Instead, this client is needing to go house to house, doing manual surveys, which are super slow and cost a ton of money. Next. Public policy, especially in the UK, is also starting to catch on to the fact that these energy performance certificates or surveys are just not quantitative enough to really underpin this massive transition in buildings. Next. This is so urgent, in fact, that the Climate Change Committee just this February published an open letter to the Department for Housing and Communities, urging for the reform of this energy performance certificate system to actually support the delivery to net zero. Next. What they said is really that we need a more quantitative way of understanding how our buildings are leaking heat and what we need to do to fix them. Next, please. So this brings us to the question of how exactly can building retrofits data problem be solved? How can we start to get more quantitative about building energy performance so that we can actually scale retrofit at the rate needed? Next. So Kestrix is our proposed solution to this problem. We are using mass thermal image capture, so think drones, and AI, specifically computer vision and machine learning, to show exactly how heat is leaking from buildings. so that building retrofits can be actually planned and validated at the city scale. Next. So how are we actually doing this at Kestrix? So first off, we are scanning the built environment for heat loss. We're working with a number of partners to do this. These are a couple of UK drone companies. Secondly, we are building the software to extract energy performance insights. So basically insights on how heat is leaking from buildings with computer vision and machine learning algorithms from only exterior images. So no interior data needed. And thirdly, we're pulling this all together into a dashboard that a city or a housing provider or an energy utility can use to streamline retrofit planning and verification. So you can understand where you need to retrofit first and actually look at the outcomes afterwards to verify those carbon emissions reductions. Next. So how does this actually work in practice? The sort of 4 things you're going to be able to see on the platform are, number one, which assets out of dozens or hundreds or thousands are leaking the most heat. Secondly, you can understand where the heat is leaking exactly. And then based on this, you can see what actually can be done to improve things and how much it will cost. So you can run sort of a cost benefit analysis at the portfolio level or even at the city or municipality level. Next. So the next kind of question, I think, for any sort of building physicists in the room or thermography enthusiasts is, what is actually special and novel about what Kestrix is doing? So, are we just throwing around the word AI, or are we actually doing something novel with AI? The answer is that we are going to be the first to apply machine learning and computer vision to do 3 key things. So firstly, we are understanding the rate of emissivity from different materials by kind of automatically classifying materials with a machine. So we can see what the building is doing in terms of leakage just from images. Next, we are training algorithms to detect thermal bridging and failed insulation, so you can diagnose a problem quickly. And third, we're predicting building component U values. And basically, all of this together allows us to estimate this key metric of space heating demand intensity, or basically the rate at which heat is leaking from a building. So when you combine this sort of space heating demand intensity metric with data, for instance, about building geometry, that's when you can start to actually estimate how much it would cost to put exterior wall insulation, for example, on one side of a house. Next, please. So where is Kestrix in terms of our development? So as I said, we're a relatively early stage startup. We've received a little bit of equity funding, under 500,000, and some grant funding. And we're really in the process now of delivering our first pilots for customers. So our first customer is Clarion Housing Association, which is the UK's largest social housing provider. They are looking after about 140,000 units. And they have a huge problem in that they need to retrofit, but they are really not supported by the data that exists. So they need to understand their stock better, and they need to do that in a time-effective manner and cost-effective manner. So how are we helping them at Kestrix when we don't have a full product up and running? Well, first we scanned 20 of their buildings. We're converting those 2D images into 3D models so they can visualize heat loss. We're identifying thermal anomalies and grouping them, and then we're coming out with a retrofit priority ranking. And we're going to really work on this data over the next year to refine it and make sure we're delivering the right things for Clarion. But yeah, very much pilot stage. Next. And the work that we're doing for housing associations now is around planning and validating retrofit. But there are dozens of ways that we intend to use our algorithms to accelerate building upgrades, from unlocking financing to enabling the verification quantitatively of CO2 reductions, to visually engaging stakeholders on the retrofit journey. When retrofits are happening, inside your own home, maybe you want to understand what's going on. Next. And what other sorts of traction are we seeing lastly? Like I said, we've raised some equity financing from Carbon 13, which is a Cambridge, UK accelerator. We were also successful in a bid for a $300,000 grant in a consortium with Peabody and United Living, who are a main contractor and a large housing association. And lastly, we've got a letter of support signed from a Big 6 utility. We're totally in the UK right now, but I was especially excited to be on this webinar because I'm really looking forward to connecting with local government and stakeholders in the US to understand whether something like this could be useful for the market, especially given the recent sort of IRA breakthroughs. Next, please. So I'll leave it with that. We're getting retrofit with Kestrix, and we really hope you'll join us, whether it's now or down the line. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucy. And thank you to our incredible group of panelists. What just fantastic and really intriguing presentations. So I have been seeing a number of folks are asking questions. So I am going to stop sharing the screen, and we'll start to bring up our panelists so that we can start getting to those questions. I will also just say for folks who have a question but haven't yet put it in the chat, I encourage you to do so, and hope we will try to get to as many of them as possible. So keep them coming, and we'll do our very best to cover them all. So I'm going to start with a general question that kind of came at the top, and would just be curious to hear anyone respond to it. But the first is, do any mapping projects include research for property owners specifically? And how do these layers, are there any kind of components that fit into compliance with regulations, specifically as it relates to things like the stretch code or other special code compliance and violations of those codes? So I'll let anyone go, but does anyone want to start and take that first?
Logan, I'll take a stab at that. I mean, I think, obviously the challenge around many of these tools that you're looking at is sources of data. And in terms of publicly available data, we need more robust open platforms with application programming interfaces or web services to be able to get access to these data. So to the degree that a municipality has this information in some type of database, they can be exposed on a map. However, without that kind of data, it's pretty impossible to do. So there are limitations today that exist largely because of just the lack of investment in IT infrastructure. So one of the things I continue to try to evangelize is that when it comes to policy, we need more data science and more data management infrastructure.
That's really helpful, Greg, and I think a good point around the data. Craig, go for it.
Yeah, just wanted to echo with BlocMap specifically, as Greg said, if the city has the data, we can definitely layer it on.
And any other responses before we go? That is perfect. I'm actually going to jump ahead, and I'm going to kind of go back and forth. So this is not going to be in order, but I saw that Corey just put a question in the chat about the challenge that Massachusetts has, and I think this relates to places all across the U.S. and in Europe. But there's a challenge in addition to building decarbonization of addressing gas leaks. And also thinking through how we retire old gas infrastructure as we transition to a clean energy future. And so, I think it's a good question of, are we thinking about bridging these? Some of the mapping technologies seem to have multiple applications. Has there been any bridging and consideration of building decarbonization in tangent with the transition of our grid?
Logan, I'll take that again. So in the community landscape analysis that we've completed, we do include a gas leak map, and clearly there is an opportunity, I think, in densely populated neighborhoods like Grove Hall for the ability, future ability to make those geothermal grids where we repurpose the piping that's used for the gas infrastructure to carry water that's cooled or heated or cooled through the Earth's crust. And there are several geothermal microgrid or geothermal grid pilot projects going on in Massachusetts. And I think it's a very promising and exciting technology to address decarbonization in very densely populated urban environments while still providing utilities with a potential future for their stranded gas assets.
Any other comments or thoughts on this and how it relates to your technology or the company's work?
I can jump in again. Oh, sorry. Just so with block maps, we have talked about expanding the tool to for instance, like be able to estimate the new demands of the electrical load on the grid as we electrify buildings, right? They're going to have more electrical demand in certain areas, and thinking about the placement of things like substations or other investments that the utilities might need to make. We haven't done that. We've heard some interest, but I think not enough interest from customers to make that step. But that's something that we are thinking about. We haven't yet talked about mapping on gas leaks, Corey, though. Obviously, it's a critically important component of all this, and yeah, I think we'd be open to that again if there is strong demand from customers for that.
Just to add to that, on the Kestrix front, we also haven't heard a huge amount of demand for that sort of technology. That may be because mostly we've been speaking to social housing asset owners and less to cities or utilities. But there is definitely scope for us to do something with that, given the thermal imaging. There's obvious potential there. But we haven't spoken about it at length, but curious to learn more. And I know that it's a huge problem in Massachusetts.
I guess I'll just add that we don't have that sort of thing built into our roadmap, but again, it could be built in. Our next stage of building out our roadmap is making it applicable to campuses that have like a central district heating system, where they want to retrofit that as opposed to a more decentralized approach. But I have heard about these natural gas retrofit as geothermal networks, and I think it's really exciting and it makes a lot of sense. So, and I've heard about it as National Grid is doing a pilot. So looking forward to hearing how that goes.
Absolutely. Yes. And it is one of those things where I think everyone in the space needs to, or, is just kind of coming to the recognition and the realization of, marrying these two as a critical kind of piece of the puzzle. So this next question is for Lucy, but I think folks can generally kind of respond to it. And it was about kind of both the use of artificial intelligence as well as kind of some of the technology around kind of imaging. I think that there was a general comment and question around any limitations that exist with personal information as it relates to both AI and to imaging. How do you address that? What are the limitations and what are the some of the things that we should be thinking about when we think about the capabilities around building mapping?
So I can start with that one. So to answer Helena's question directly, the interesting thing is that basically whatever Google Maps is allowed to do, we're allowed to do. So actually in Germany, we have some issues. In Germany, Google Maps actually was not able to take any street view imagery. But since we're shooting thermal, you actually get less information. You can't see through a window. You can only see the heat loss profile. So really the only thing we would be able to tell is whether an occupant was inside the house at the time the image was taken or not. The thing that's a bit more challenging is the drone regulations piece. Can you fly in certain airspace? Can you not? In the UK, at least, you do need takeoff and landing permission from a landowner, which necessitates pretty strong relationships with local authorities and councils, which is, kills two birds with one stone, feeds two birds with one seed for us, because we aim to help them directly with our product. But in the US, actually, there's increasingly more relaxed rules around drones, particularly as big players like Amazon start to play with drone deliveries. So that actually is something we're planning to slipstream behind, and another reason we're excited about the US market. And I think, yeah, more broadly, a word on just how Kestrix is using AI. I would say that there's less personal information that's going into our models and more information on, for example, the emissivity of different materials. So what we're training a model to do is intelligently recognize that this is brick and cross-reference that basically with the emissivity of brick to give you an idea of what the actual surface temperature that the thermal camera gets means for that. And then, sorry, just to address Elizabeth's question on the quality of our thermal imaging while I'm here. The one that we took there was taken by my co-founder last May, which, as you might be able to guess, without a 10-degree temperature differential between inside and outside, and with solar gain, if you take it during the day, is not going to come up with a very good thermal image. We put that in the platform because at the time, actually, that was the only data we had. We just flew our first pilot with Clarion a couple of weeks ago and are now mocking those up into 3D for them. So that'll give you a sense of how early we are as a startup. We only got started in October, but yeah, we're well aware that that is not a perfect thermal image, and shouldn't trust us if we try and give you one that looks like that for a project.
Excellent. I think that was very helpful. Anyone who wants to add a quick comment before we move on regarding this topic?
So Logan, I would just like to offer that, like any emerging technology, we need to begin thinking about, new regulations that are going to help govern how these technologies are deployed, so that then we don't have unintended consequences. And as everyone's aware, AI has been in quite in the press recently, and so hopefully, as we evolve some of these new tools, we will, in parallel, recognize the need to have good regulatory frameworks so that these technologies can be beneficial and not harmful.
I think that is a particularly relevant comment, and AI can be an incredible tool and asset in the context of building decarbonization and the climate crisis, but doing it in a way that is smart and in line with values is critical. I want to kind of go to hopefully we'll be able to get to more, but I want to go to another question that came in recently, but it was talking about kind of technology. So when we think about building mapping, how far along are we with the technology? Do we feel like we have kind of reached a point where we have enough to do this well, accurately, and we're really kind of at the top of our game, or is there room for improvement? And what technology should is kind of first priority as we start to think about how we can continue to improve on what we are doing already? And I'll open this to anyone if someone wants to jump in first.
Okay, I'll take another stab at that. So in my opinion, what we're lacking is, we need more data standards. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with HPXML. It's a standard that was developed around home energy efficiency and being able to share data from an energy model. We need to have data standards that deal with some of the new building performance standards and compliance, stretch codes and other things that we're doing so that this data can be exchanged, seamlessly. I mean, today, anyone who's been involved in IT, recognizes that, you lose data fidelity when you do transformation. And so having standards where we can interoperate with, is really, really super critical. And also another area that there's not enough attention because, we have the technology, we just don't have the data.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I'll jump in here. So most of the data that we get for our building mapping tool is from the building owner directly. And if we didn't have that information, or if we didn't want to bother our members with that request, we'd go to tax assessor data. And though it's it's a huge data set, it's still not comprehensive enough to get us everything that we need. And I don't want to say that it ought to be everything we need, because it would be an enormous lift on the part of the cities and towns to get all that data. So I would say that the technology is good enough for where we're at. And at this point, in terms of implementing building decarbonization and heat pumps, I think the technology is there. It's still getting better, but heat pumps are good enough for cold climates, and we should be implementing them ASAP. There are some end uses where there's, technology tweaks to be made, especially in hydronic buildings, but for the most part, we're there.
Yeah, I would strongly agree with that, and just say, but when we get to the building level implementation stage for us, we don't just rely on data. We do have someone go in and do a site visit and scope the project before we take that final step. So, but the data, again, is really, really helpful in narrowing down who you're talking to. So you're going to really prioritize outreach and prioritize for us which buildings make the most sense to target and have conversations with. But as Erin said, we ultimately want the data from the building owners, and the assessments from trained professionals to really understand the building before we install a heat pump in someone's home, for instance.
I think this is really helpful, and I'm even seeing in the chat, a call to kind of do more work around this, and I think this is an area where MCAN would be happy to partner with BEA, because we are seeing that data is increasingly more and more important, and who has it has a lot of power. So it's both supporting the collection of that data and also the accessibility. I want to close with one question. I'd love a response from everyone if they have one, and if not, totally okay. But a lot of folks in the room are either local, municipal officials or advocates who care deeply about building decarbonization, and doing so in a way that is equitable and in a way that increases resilience. So, are there any parting words of advice from the experts, who are doing this work? How should we be looking at building mapping as part of our advocacy or as part of our strategy as a municipal official on the at the local level, and perhaps more specifically, how can we make sure that as we think about this, we are doing so in a way that prioritizes equity? So not an easy question, but does anyone want to take an initial stab?
I'll take a stab at that, Logan, and thank you for asking that question. I mean, I think there's a delicate balancing act between the pace of the technology and solutions we have and what we should be, regulating or promoting. I mean, we do have climate policies that have unintended consequences. If you think about, our gas system and bans in some of our more vulnerable communities, when you're looking at potentially an average cost to do a deep retrofit in an older building at $100K per unit, and you put that puts it outside the reach of many families, poor families, then we run into a situation where some policies that had good intentions potentially have very bad equity outcomes. And we've seen this story or this movie before. And so I think as everyone's considering their different adoption of building performance standards and ordinance and others, we really do have to recognize that, over time, the technology is going to decrease costs. So we may have to do things in phases. So we're not imposing on the people that have been most harmed costs that they can't afford, and forcing them into situations where they get to support the stranded assets. That's something we really have to be very intentional, very methodical in our plan. And this is why planning is so important. We need more robust planning tools so that these kinds of things can be done with the least amount of unintended consequences.
And I know we're right at time, but does anyone else want to weigh in on this?
I think my parting word would be, it's really hard to manage what you don't measure. And at Kestrix, we're really trying to just start with the data. I think, it depends, certain commercial buildings, especially, easier to access energy consumption data, but particularly with residential, it's incredibly hard to get someone to hand over their bills. And what we want to do is make planning something starting with that original data set possible, without involving any occupants, and really just, especially from a municipality perspective, give you a sense of where you stand, give you a sense of which homes are heat pump ready, and then give you a sense also of when you start putting insulation in, particularly, what is actually the impact of that. And yeah, like I said, we're very early, but very keen to chat to as many stakeholders as we can in Massachusetts to understand whether this is an approach that's interesting at all, given the data problem.
And just echoing Lucy and Greg again, you absolutely have to measure and plan to do this right. But I think the other piece we haven't talked too much about it are that there are incentives for low income households out there, and I think understanding those incentives and being ready to deploy them in every single scenario, and then identifying where there are gaps, right? Where are the incentives not strong enough, and use that information through your planning to help drive policy for better and stronger incentives for those areas.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And I would just add that PowerOptions is taking the Justice 40 approach. So for 100 roadmaps that we do, we're ensuring that 40 of them are, or more, are in disadvantaged communities. So we're trying really hard to make sure that they're not left behind, but that they're also enjoying the momentum of the low-hanging fruit. So.
Wonderful. Well, I think that is a great way to end things. On behalf of MCAN and BEA, I want to thank all of our panelists for a fantastic discussion. And I want to thank everyone who was able to join us this afternoon. This is a really sometimes complex, but really important issue. And so we just appreciate your attention and commitment to this work. And we are so excited to be in partnership with you all in doing it. So with that being said, I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you again to our panelists and to our partner organization. And I'm sure we will continue this conversation both in future events and in our regular programming. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.